Hey folks, Eric the old jarhead here. I wanted to take a minute and talk a little bit about billing, charging, how much you charge to do what you do. Seems to be a lot of people ask a lot of questions about what you should charge or how much you should charge to run your sawmill. I think there's a lot of factors that can come into play with how you answer that question. I would give you the caveat that I'm going to answer this strictly from a 100% portable sawyer versus, say, somebody that has their own logs, they have you bring the logs to them, that sort of thing. So I think I'm going to move a little bit because the sun is just blasting away here. Let's see if that works a little bit better. All right, so from a portable sawyer standpoint, I think probably the most important thing to consider is free market is essentially what the market can bear. How many guys are out there doing the job? How many are willing to pull their mills? How much experience they have. You might be competing against guys that have 30 years experience, or there might be guys that don't have any experience in your area. So all those things have to come into play with how you decide what you're going to bill for your given service. But I really wanted to talk about kind of the difference between how you treat billing somebody hourly versus by the board foot. And a lot of guys talk about how they bill by the board foot. I don't. I bill by the hour. And so I wanted to kind of talk about that a little bit. First, let's talk about board foot rates. So I did some really simple, quick, down and dirty calculations here for you. And when I started milling, it was pretty common to charge 35 cents a board foot. Now, I know that today I've seen online numbers from anywhere from 35 cents to 70 cents a board foot, and it ranges all over the place, and that's okay. But what I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about 35 cents a board foot, just as an example to compare it to an hourly rate. So at 35 cents a board foot, if you mill 250 board feet an hour, say you got an LT40 like this one, the logs are okay, they're not great, but they're okay. The help is okay, and you can get 250 an hour. That means that your hourly rate at 35 cents a board foot would run to $87.50 per hour, okay? Now that's when you're milling. Obviously, if you're changing a band, you're taking a break, something else happened, you're waiting on the customer, whatever, you're not getting paid. So that's $87.50 per hour while you run your sawmill. At 300 board feet an hour, these mills are capable of more than that. They're capable, I think this one was rated at 500, and I've done 500 on it. At 300, you're looking at 105 an hour. At 400, 140, and at 500, it's $175 an hour. So I've done some jobs where I've been able to mill at 500 board feet an hour. And, you know, if I was milling by the board foot, sure, could have got 175 bucks an hour. I don't charge that though, so I want to talk a little bit about that. And again, sorry about the sun, it's pretty bright here today. And as Dave, the old man in the saw, would say, the sawmill's not running today. So anyway, I'm going to talk about stuff instead. Okay, if you get a job like I did once up in Republic about 6 years ago, customer wasn't able to help, their help didn't show up, I had a choice to either pull off the job, which I was several hours from home, at least 3. You got all that fuel, you got everything else to get up there. I wasn't going to pull off the job, so I did it myself. I was running about 150 board feet an hour, and if I charged 35 cents a board foot, I'd have made $52.50 an hour when the mill was running. Now we're getting down there. Just to deliver my mill at 100 miles, I get about 9.5 miles to the gallon pulling the mill with my camper. And 150 miles away, I'm staying somewhere, I would spend about $95 just in fuel to get there and back, plus the 2.5 to 3 hours of driving each way. Of course, there's lodging, so either you got to stay in a hotel and somebody's got to pay you per diem. If you're like me, you have a camper, is somebody going to pay for you to use your camper? And I think they should, okay? You've got fuel for the sawmill, tools, the cost of the sawmill itself, band changes, maintenance. Maybe you need to pay for your own health care. There's all those other things to consider. So if you're milling at 35 cents a board foot and you're milling 300 board feet an hour, you're going to make 105 an hour when you're running the mill. So nothing wrong with charging that way. I think it works out for some folks. I always say that the cost of milling, there's more to it. You're not just running the sawmill. You got to do your setup. You got to do maintenance. You got to fix things. You got to pay for the mill. There's all kinds of other factors involved. When you are a remote sawyer, you never know what you're going to get. You can do a site visit, but what if the logs are all 9-inch logs, 16 feet long? You're just not going to get a lot of lumber out of them. If you're milling alone, then you've got some other issues to deal with, right? You got to remove the slabs. You got to pull the lumber off the mill, etc., etc. While you might be able to mill 150 board feet an hour, that 150 board feet an hour is only when the mill is running. What about when you do band changes? That kind of thing. You're rolling a log. You got to pull the chainsaw out and cut a hook out, something of that nature. You got to whittle a log that's really big. I've done logs that were over 42 inches. A lot of chainsaw work to get one of those through the mill. So there are advantages, obviously. Again, I mean, if I'm milling 500 board feet an hour, I can make 175 bucks an hour while running the mill. Ain't nothing wrong with that. However, I like to run hourly. When I run hourly, that actually really works out for me. The way I bill the customer when I'm working hourly is I bill from the time the mill is ready to go, which is generally 8 a.m. in the morning, until I take my breaks. I'll take a break after a couple hours, maybe 15 minutes, take a very short lunch break, tops 30 minutes. Do that around noon, noon 30. Take a coffee break in the afternoon around 2 for 15 minutes, and I don't bill for those breaks. However, changing a band is part of running a sawmill. Bands don't last all day long. So I'm having to change a band anywhere from every hour. If I'm milling big, monstrous dry logs that are 500 board feet and I'm knocking them out in under an hour, I still got to change a band if the band's dull, to maybe twice a day. It really depends on the logs, the conditions, how much dirt, how sappy they are, if they're super dry, super big, wide cuts, narrow cuts. All those things are different things that you have to factor in that you don't necessarily know until you get out on the job. Sure, the customer can give you a cut list, and I always ask for one. Cut lists change. Customer finds out that you're a custom sawyer. You can do whatever they want. They might change the cut list right in the middle. Maybe they're going to go from milling 2x12s to 1x4s. I do that. I'll do that for them. But that means that my milling rate, if I was milling by the board foot, could change quite a bit based on the kind of work that I'm doing and how much I'm doing. Sure, if I'm milling big beams, I'm going to be milling like crazy. But if I'm milling 3/4 inch 1x4s, I got to make a lot of cuts to do that versus, say, 2x12s full dimension. So I bill by the hour. I bill for band changes. So as long as all I'm doing is making sawdust and changing bands when I need to, customer pays for that. If I have to run my chainsaw, customer pays for that. If I have to sit around and wait for the customer, so let's say I show up on a job site, customer's there, they get the logs ready, I mill through the logs they have ready, they'll go take lunch, and I'm sitting there at the mill with no logs and I can't make sawdust, and they're gone for 2 hours, I'm gonna bill them. I'll take my lunch for 30 minutes and bill them for an hour and a half for me sitting there. And the important part of that is that if you're a remote sawyer, you're mobile, you're out there in the woods, that's the service you're providing. You're providing the service of the sawmill heading out into the woods to meet the customer out there to do the work they're asking you to do. It's kind of like if a customer, let's say you work at a big rental place that rents skid steers or track hoes or whatever. If the customer rents that track hoe for a day, they're going to pay for the day. They get their 8 hours they can run it in that day, and they're going to pay for that. If they run it 12 hours that day, they're going to pay for that extra 12 hours. Some places don't. I've rented track hoes where they bill you by the day at 8 hours, but if you run it 12, they don't care. They bill you for the day. But the point is that they're going to pay. They understand that they're going to pay for that by the day, unless they ask for a half day somehow. I've never seen that. If you rent one for a week, you're paying for the whole week, no matter how much you use it. I happen to know my wife works at a rental place, and they bill them for the week. If you don't use it for that week, you still had it. They couldn't rent it out to someone else. And that's kind of how I look at running the sawmill. I think I'm going to step over here in the shade and get out of this bright sun for you. But this is a sign. That's a sign that winter is starting to end. So that's a good thing. Oh, I'm in the shade. Maybe I can see a little better now. Hopefully you can see me. All right, so I'm billing the customer for the time that my mill is at their location and I am available and ready to run the sawmill. So if I show up at 8 o'clock in the morning and the customer doesn't have any logs ready for me, I've already made the agreement with them that I'm going to be there and be ready. Love it when you live near an airport and you can hear the planes flying overhead when you're trying to make a video. So I let the customer know. It's part of my contract. If I'm sitting still waiting for you, I'm going to bill you for that. If I do band changes, I'm billing you for that. Now, but if I have to do maintenance on the mill, I'm not billing for that. Okay, that's not their fault that I had to do maintenance on my sawmill. Hey, they're there for me to mill. If they're ready and I can't mill because of me, then they're not paying for that. So I think the key here is that my milling rate, which is $100 an hour, reflects pretty closely to 35 cents a board foot if milling at about 300 board feet an hour. Now, I do tend to average in that 300 plus range. So actually, I think the customer's getting a pretty good deal when I bill them at $100 an hour. And what I do is at the end of the day, I tally up all the lumber that I've made for the customer, and I'll let them know. I milled 3,000 board feet for you today, or whatever it was. I don't usually give them a board foot rate, but sometimes I'll let them know. Honestly, I will tell you that virtually all of my customers have not understood the board foot rate of charging. They understand hourly rates. Now, I'm not telling you that you should charge hourly. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just giving you my experience. And my experience is that customers understand hourly rates. Hey, they got a plumber that they call. He's going to charge them by the hour. They take their car in to get a service done on it. They're going to pay by the hour. They get an electrician to come wire out their nice fancy shop. Pay them by the hour, right? Now, sure, those guys may quote that job out. I do. But they're going to list the hours that they worked as part of that billing, okay? Customers understand hourly rates. If you live in an area or you have customers that understand board foot rates and you want to charge by the board foot, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or there's anything wrong with that. I'm just trying to explain the difference between the two. All right, so we've got board foot rates. I will tell you that I think if you're going to bill by the board foot, the most important aspect of that is explaining to the customer how you're billing them and how that works out. If I mill 1,000 board feet, it's going to cost you $350. You're going to often have to explain what a board foot is. A lot of times I find customers don't know what a board foot is. So you have to tell them, well, it's 1 by 12 by 12. And if you're milling 2 by 6s, well, then you got 2 by 6 by 12. Okay. If you're milling dimensional rather than full dimension, then your board foot rate, generally you would think that it's based on that. So if I'm milling 1 5/8 by 5 5/8 to give a dimensional 2 by 6 with a 1/8 of an inch over, like on a ponderosa pine, they almost don't shrink at all. You have to calculate your board foot based on an 1 5/8 by 5 5/8, not a 2 by 6, right? Some guys will say, "Ah, the heck with it, I'm billing you for a 2 by 6. So a lot of times customers are confused by that. But when I bill them by the hour, there's really only two things that they're really interested in. One, how much is it going to cost me? And how much did it cost me, I guess you could say. And how much did you produce for me, or how much can you produce, right? So if I tell a customer, you've got 20 logs, I'm going to get 3,000 board feet out of that, and with really good help, I might be able to get that in an 8-hour day. I've done it in a lot less. 500 board feet an hour times 6 hours is 3,000 board feet. So you could do 3,000 board feet in a day, no problem. I've done 3,500 plus. Definitely a doable thing. I'm going to charge you 8 hours for an 8-hour day. So if I get 3,000 board feet in, you're getting a pretty good rate. If I charge you by the board foot, it's going to be like $175 per hour that I milled, right? The other thing I think you have to consider, especially for board foot rates, is that you got to drive the mill out there. So like I said earlier, if 100 miles, I'm looking at 2.5 to 3 hours to get the mill out there, and I'm milling a lot of off-road stuff. So sure, you might be able to do that on the interstate in 2.5 hours or less, but you know what? You're not going to do that out in the middle of the woods pulling your sawmill at 2 miles an hour for 5 miles or something like that. You've got to account for the time it takes you to set your mill up. Now mine, it sets up really fast, right? I probably have my mill ready to go in 30 minutes flat without batting an eye, and that's lubed and ready to go. Some job sites takes a little bit longer. Sometimes I got to dig out a little bit underneath the tires or underneath the outriggers or something like that, and it takes a little longer. You got to remember, you got to do band changes. You got to do maintenance, right? My mill's sitting in my driveway right now, and if I do maintenance, no one's paying me to do that maintenance. So when I'm billing on a job, part of what I'm billing people for is the other expenses that they're not gonna witness, right? They don't see me doing the maintenance on my mill in order to keep my mill in top working condition, so that when I show up to do a job for them, the mill's ready to go. You know, the other thing that I would say too is, if I go out and I mill in the woods for somebody, 9 times out of 10, I spend an hour in the morning getting ready. Now, maybe only 30 minutes setting up my sawmill, but after that 30 minutes, I'm usually doing something, scaling logs, trying to make sure that things are set up the way they should be, planning out for the customer, whatever. I'm busy. I'm ready to go. So at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm ready to go. I give them my safety brief, preferably before 8 a.m., but I always do a safety brief. And I'm not getting paid for that. And then I start milling, let's say at 8 a.m. If I quit at 5 p.m., they all go home. But I've still got to tear down the mill, clean up everything, get everything ready to go, repack everything, and then still drive home. So a lot of times on a job where I might be billing a customer for, 8 hours a day, I'm probably working at least 10 hours that day. If I'm on site, I'm probably working 10 hours a day. If I drive there, well, typically what happens is I drive the day before. It takes me 2 or 3 hours to get there. I get the mill set up, get all that done. Set up my camper, get everything ready to go. In the morning, I come out and I'll lube up the mill, get it all ready to go. And once the mill's ready to go, we start milling. At 5, when they all leave, I do the tear down. I get everything ready to go. If I'm going to mill the next day, that's okay, but I still have to spend time getting the mill ready for the next day. I'm probably going to go through and scale what I milled for them that day. Count it up, figure it out. How much did I mill? Did I mill 2,000 board feet, 1,500, 3,000, whatever? I'm going to put that on there. All right, so I think the message here that I'm trying to deliver is that while board foot rates work for a lot of people, I don't use them. I mill by the hour. I think milling by the hour works very well. Typically, I will tell you that my customers get their lumber at a lower board foot rate than a lot of guys will charge, because I'm an experienced sawyer. I've been doing it long enough that I can crank out the lumber on this sawmill. I may not be Magic Man off forestry farm, and that's a hint, but I've absolutely milled 350 to 500 board feet a day consistently, bang, 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 nonstop, without being in the absolute best conditions to mill. And I think that's important to understand. However, at $100 an hour, they're getting better than 35 cents a board foot. In fact, I've calculated for customers in the past that they were getting their lumber at about 25 cents a board foot, between 25 and 30 at most. And that's a big deal, right? They're getting it cheaper than they would have got it in a lot of other cases. But I also think it's important to realize you're not competing against the big sawmills. My son works in a sawmill that can produce something near 1 million board feet a day in a 12-hour shift. I'm not competing against them. I'm not competing against Home Depot or Lowe's or any of the big box stores that sell lumber, really discounted lumber. I'm not competing against them at all. I'm not competing against the Amish either, right? I know a lot of guys say, well, I got to compete with the Amish. No, you don't. Find your niche. That's the key. I found mine. My niche is remote milling. And when I mean remote, I mean I might need 4-wheel drive sometimes. I go out in the woods, I stay out there, I stay on site, I can mill for days. And so I'm providing a very unique service. And I think that's really the key to how you determine how to bill. I know a lot of guys that have stationary mills, it's different. The logs come to them, they mill them at their own leisure. They can charge 50 cents a board foot or whatever they charge. Doesn't really matter how long it takes them to get them done. Doesn't matter what their production rates are or anything else. It's a rate they're going to charge, and that's what they're going to get. And if they work really hard and fast, they might make more money. If they don't feel like working hard that day, that's okay. They're okay with that. They're going to get what they get. They know that for 1,000 board feet, they're going to get $500 or whatever it is they bill. For me, when I drag my sawmill out into the woods, I've got to get as much done as I can in the period of time that I've slotted to do it, try to produce the best possible lumber I can so that my customer gets the best product that I can provide in the shortest period of time. I'm out there to get the job done. That's what I'm there to do, and I'm going to do everything I can to knock that job out and get it done as soon as I can so I can get back on the road and head home. Now, a lot of guys might say, yeah, but you're charging by the hour. Why would you do that? Well, I do it because that's the service that I'm providing, and they know that. I've got repeat customers that know that when the old jarhead shows up on site, he's going to bust ass, take names, or as we used to say in the Corps, kick ass and take initials because we're not staying long enough to take names. And that's what I'm doing. Taking this mill out there, and I'm gonna rock and roll on that sucker until the job is done. And you know what? I'm not wearing yoga pants or tank tops either, and you can thank me for that. I'm gonna be covered in sawdust, grease, oil, dirt, and grime. You know, I'm wearing long sleeves, folks. Jeans, long sleeves, heavy shirts. You know, I'm gonna get dirty. I'm gonna be on the ground. I'm gonna be getting full of sawdust and everything else. So in any case, I hope this helps answer some questions for you. If you have any questions about billing by the hour versus billing by the board foot, put your questions down in the comments below. I'm happy to answer those for you. And if you like this video, if you found it useful, do me a favor, hit that like button. It'll pass it around to others so they can see it, and I'd really appreciate it. Y'all have a great day. Yo, Jarhead out.